The conference is now starting. All attendees can now hear you.
Hello and welcome to CIO Index webinar on the emerging role of the CIO. We're delighted to have you on board for this very interesting and important discussion. My name is Sourabh Hajela, and I'll be your moderator for this webinar. This webcast is part of our series on the new CIO. We are presenting this webcast in association with IBM. Please visit www.cioindex.com to review the topics and sign up for the upcoming webinars in this series. At this point, I'd like to go over some housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded. It'll last for approximately 60 minutes, of which we will utilize about 50 minutes for presentations, and the rest of the time we will devote for your questions and answers. Please remember, you can ask us questions at any time using the question and answer panel. Please take a look at your control panel and see some of the salient features on this control panel. You can provide us with your satisfaction level using the satisfaction score. You can ask us questions and answers using the Q&A panel. And at any point during the webinar, if you need assistance, please use the chat panel to chat with me directly, and I will be happy to respond to your questions. Your phones have been muted, so you can't ask questions using your phone, so please remember, you can only use your Q&A panel for questions and answers. It is my pleasure to introduce to you a well-respected panel of experts on the topic of the emerging role of the CIO. Gary Barnett is a research director with Ovum. Mr. Barnett is responsible for research into open source, intellectual property, and on-demand technology, focusing on the strategic issues surrounding technology selection, best practices, and strategy. Gary is frequently quoted in the worldwide trade press and writes columns for several IT-related publications. He's a well-known speaker at conferences on topics as varied as the future of the CIO, IT doesn't matter, and outsourcing. Hello and welcome, Gary.
Hi, and thanks for joining, everyone.
Olaf Pripp is a managing partner for the CIO practice for Heidrick & Struggles. Mr. Pripp focuses on recruiting senior CIOs across a multiple number of industries. During his career as a senior partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers and IBM, he acted as the global general manager for the technology industry practice and worked on some of the largest accounts and outsourcing deals worldwide. Hi, Olaf.
Hi, pleasure to be here.
And last but not the least, Robin Reardon is an executive partner in the technology strategy and change practice of IBM. Mr. Reardon has a wealth of experience in IT transformation and governance across a broad range of industries and IT operations. His project experience includes IS strategy development, strategic IT business transformation, outsourcing, IT systems integration strategy, and major change program leadership. Prior to joining IBM, Robin held a senior commercial IT role at British Steel. Hello and welcome, Robin.
Hi there, and thanks everybody for joining, and hope it's a good session and useful for you.
Fantastic. Now, I just wanted to make an introduction to this topic, which I don't believe really needs an introduction. We all know that IT has had major transformation over the last 3 to 4 decades, moving from the back office all the way to being a strategic weapon used by business to create competitive differentiation, competitive advantage. Now, along the way, the person who is managing this important function, their role has also changed from the head of MIS to head of IT and chief information officer. There have been very different definitions of this role, but now I believe that it's being clearly defined. And now we believe that this is an important time for us to have a discussion on what exactly are the expectations of this new role of the CIO, how does one prepare for this new role for the CIO, and for people who are aspiring to be CIOs, what is it that they need to do in order to get acclimatized to the expectations of the CEO and the board are putting on them. So in this webinar, what we're going to do is define the problem, identify the issues related to the role of the CIO, introduce the concept of the CIO as a business leader, show how understanding and mastering these skills can help you create and sustain value for your organization and, of course, a meaningful career for yourself. At this point, I'm going to push a poll question to you, so please take some time to respond to that poll question. And after you'll have approximately 60 seconds to respond to it, and at that point, I will hand over the presentation to Olaf. Olaf, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. And good morning and good afternoon again. And thanks for hosting me here today. The introduction was pretty much done, so I just wanted to tell you that I spend most of my time actually working across, get this in the slide, voila, the world, working with CEOs and other HR executives, recruiting CIOs to their businesses. And the purpose of my presentation today is to provide you with my thoughts on the emerging role of a CIO. Without boring you with too many numbers, I just wanted to simply let you know that Heidrick & Struggles is one of the world's oldest and most prominent executive search firms. We have some 1,600 staff worldwide and a turnover of around $500 million. More importantly, I think is one of the things that clearly sets us apart from our competitors is the fact that we do not work as generalists in the search industry. On the contrary, we specialize in industry and functional practices, which in our view is the only way we can truly understand our clients' business challenges and, equally important, get to know the talent. We have recruited some 500 CIOs over the last couple of years, so we do have a good understanding of the kind of trends you see in the market. And we do believe that CIO is a very key position for any company out there. Like you, I'm constantly getting invitations to seminars which will try to tell you in which direction the CIO role is evolving. And just to be clear, in my view, and this may actually disappoint some people in the audience today, there is no single answer to this question. And more importantly, I don't think there is a right answer to this question. What is the right answer for one company may be the wrong answer for the other. And anyhow, it is how the CIO executes his responsibilities and his mandate which typically makes the difference. I have listed here quite a number of evolutions of the traditional CIO role. And indeed, just to be clear, many organizations are still looking for the traditional CIOs. But the other kind of CIO roles we see a lot of demand for are listed on these slides. And let's walk them through one by one. The first one is the business partner. This is typically suited for organizations who are looking for additional top management capability on board level to work as all the other board executives taking the company forward. As an example, I had a request this morning from a private equity-backed company who is going through a merger of equals. And their take is that the experience of a CIO to handle integrations, to run large-scale programs, are seen vital where they are in their business. And they are looking for a CIO who will not only add his knowledge about running a CIO function, but actually act as one of the top leaders of that company. The second role I listed here is the innovator. As you know, many companies sees innovation as the best path to profitable success and acknowledges that technology holds the success to the next wave of innovation. As an example, I talked recently to a CIO of a large insurance company who runs their corporate innovation board and has launched a numerous IT-enabled initiative to conquer new markets, often within the emerging markets. Beyond the traditional CIO role, we also see quite some demand for what I refer to the heads of operations. As we know, many CIOs have proved that they can successfully simplify, standardize, and scale operations to reduce costs, and are often asked to take on additional responsibilities for various back office functions, such as shared service centers for finance, accounting, real estate management, etc. And some even do that as an internal outsource provider for the company. We found many examples of that, particularly in the financial services industry. And if I look into it from a geographical viewpoint, this is something we see very often in Germany and also more and more often in the US. And finally, in this stack, the head of technology. And this is typical for clients in the, I would say, in the internet business, companies like Amazon and eBay, where IT is the backbone of our business model, and they are often looking for CIOs who are on the front end in terms of leveraging on the latest technology. And finally, the last part of this slide, which I think is very interesting, and this is an area where we see a lot of demand right now, that's the non-executive board member. Today, we estimate that only 1 to 2% of the Fortune 1000 companies have ex-CIOs or CIOs as non-executive board members. However, with the new regulations around disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning, triggered by changes in climate and hurricanes, by terror acts, etc., boards are now looking to bring in CIO expertise because these are the leaders who have a lot of experience to this kind of issues. Clearly, these boards are also looking into the expertise of CIOs regarding technology enablement of their business to run large-scale programs, and also quite often to get engaged in large-scale deals. Many CIOs, as you know, are running and have negotiated billion-dollar outsourcing deals and did quite some unique skill sets. So, to go back to the original questions, we really do not see, or I at least do not see, one emerging role. I see a number of emerging roles in the CIO space, and these would be the most common ones, and obviously you will also see a hybrid of these roles. I know we are somewhat limited to time today. I just wanted to bring up another topic as well when we look into the demand, and that is another trend. In our business as recruiter, we also see a lot of demand from our clients in terms of diversity, in particular to get more female IT executives into the business. And as you can see from this chart, we have a lot of work to do on that, particularly here in Europe. And when companies are looking to promote female IT executives, they are often coming from external markets. So how and where do we find the right talent? Well, I hope it's been clear from the previous slides that finding the right talent goes far beyond technology and routine managerial skills. Our clients are typically looking for us to go into global and diversified businesses with constantly changing business needs, organizations which are matrixed and federated in terms of their organizational structure, often to businesses where IT partly is outsourced, because that's another trend we see coming along very strongly. And also businesses where there is a very strong commitment from the executive management towards IT, because that's often where we see the good IT leaders coming up. So to conclude, I think the decision to put in a new CIO, to recruit a new CIO, is a very, very important decision for any company out there. But it's very important to keep in mind that there is no standard solution to what you're looking for. You really need to look into the business requirements, your specific requirements, what you're expecting from that role, and it will vary not only from industry to industry, but more importantly from company to company. I try to stick to my 10 minutes, and I think I have succeeded, but if there are any questions right now, I'm happy to take them on the spot.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Olaf. That was very interesting and clarified a few issues for me personally, and I hope the audience found the discussion very interesting as well. I think at this point, we're going to move on and hand over the presentation to Gary. But before I do that, I wanted to push another poll question. So we've already got responses for the first one. I want to push the second poll question. So here goes, folks. You've got 60 seconds to respond to this. All right, folks, I'm about to close the poll. And one mistake, I am going to push it to Robin Reardon and not Gary. So, Robin, it's all yours.
Okay, welcome everybody to my session, and again, thanks for joining. I was interested in what Olaf had to say there, because it very much coincides with some of the research that we in IBM have been doing with our colleagues. So what I want to talk you through is some of that feedback that we've had from people, plus also just to talk through with you our own thoughts on these things. So I'll just wait for a moment while the slides fire up, if you can bear with me for 1 minute. Okay, just very briefly, quick pen portrait of myself. I'm an executive partner in IBM Global Business Services. Everybody knows IBM. I hope none of you have ever been fired for buying IBM, as the saying goes. In consulting, which is where I belong in global services, we have a technology strategy group, and our role is to advise C-level clients on IT strategy, transformation, how to align business and IT strategies. And there's just a brief synopsis of my experience on the screen there. One thing I would say is as part of my background, I've not only been a consultant, but also a CIO myself, and one great bit of advice I was given by a mentor was, every day I go to work, there's only two things that I get wrong. one is everything I do, and the other's everything I say. So as you guys know, it's a very challenging job. And today's CIO role for all the people I speak to is very much a chameleon role. I mean, there are three levels that we see. The first one is keeping the lights on, i.e. keeping the IT operations running. And it's very difficult in our experience and the experience of CIOs we speak to that if you can't get that right, it's very difficult to take on the second theme, which is delivering IT-centered change. The third thing then is theme 3, which is aligning IT and business strategies. And again, if you've got the operations running and the change done, you can then get onto that top table of real proper strategy and partnership at the C-level. But as everybody knows, and similar to Olaf's challenges he mentioned, there are big challenges in the environment. Technology changes where we've moved from centralized to distributed IT to business and IT anywhere, anytime. Globalization, and also societal and organization changes within both business and in IT. So the net result of this is that the CIO role, I think, is emerging as a business leadership role. So, for example, if you look at what a CIO does today and what the role is, not only just aligning business strategy and how IT can support it, but innovating. Not only delivering IT projects, but actually orchestrating business processes and changing them, and moving from a construct of key applications to one of business components and IT services, if you like. So just a flavour there of some of the challenges, and for us at IBM, what we're seeing is this is underpinned by two major themes. One is service-oriented architecture, which is a huge hot topic, I know, in IT and business. Probably more prevalent in the States than it is in Europe at the moment, but certainly coming, which has implication for orchestration, application services, and data objects. But also the green agenda, that's another big theme that's pushing, which is in CIO terms, moving people to understanding more about data center consolidation to reduce the carbon footprint, for example. So just moving on briefly then, the real challenge, I think, for CIOs is that the successful CIO will need a balanced leadership style, and I think that again was borne out with what Olaf was saying, which is that in order to be this chameleon who has to do many different things to many different people, you have to manage business stakeholders, C-level stakeholders, your own staff, external partners. Really the future CIO needs to balance between transformational leadership, which is having a vision and pulling people forward, versus transactional leadership, which is traditional sort of risk and reward. And I think that's one of the challenges I think that people face, which is not so much that the roles are different, but it's whether the individual has the leadership skills to cope with all those different roles. So those new elements of the role, what we're seeing is today's theme of aligning IT and business strategy becoming enabling business innovation in the future, delivering IT-centered change in traditional ways through, for example, ERP replacement. Certainly a lot of CIOs I talk to are actually now in the driving seat of business transformation itself rather than just the IT elements of it. And keeping the lights on for IT is also about keeping the business running, which is about not only strong operations in IT, but taking on things such as business process outsourcing. And where that may lead us is that the role itself becomes schizophrenic and could split into the roles you see on the right, which is, for example, Chief Innovation and Strategy Officer, Chief Change Officer, Chief Operating or Purchasing Officer. And I guess the key question, and again, like Olaf, I don't think there is a right answer, is is that all one person or is that several roles? I think that very much depends on both the company and the enterprise itself and also the individual who's in that aspirational position. Just moving on then with the next slide. Just bear with me a moment. Just wanted to finish off very quickly then with some key questions about what are the implications of this evolving role as I've just described it. Can the qualities be learned, i.e. can you develop from where you are today into those different roles? what political disturbances will surround this, where will the future CIO come from, where will the CIOs spend their time in the future, and what behavioural steps now will help later. So answering the first question, we've done some research, and our view is that yes, the required qualities can be learned. I think the challenge is that while some people are more natural at broader-based leadership, it can be learned, but it can't just be learned in a classroom. So the key takeaway from that is that we're finding many CIOs do benefit and would benefit from a professional coach or even mentorship from other people to help them grow into that position if they're new to it. The political disturbances surrounding the evolution, I'm sure many of you find this at the moment anyway, is that as the role of the CIO evolves, you really do have to manage your stakeholders and your peers at the C-level to actually get that place at the board. So the skill as a political influencer, as well as a business person and a technology person, is pretty important. Looking at where the future CIO will come from, this is some, on the next slide, slide 10, is some research that IBM's done with the CIO Leadership Forum that we run. And you can see at the moment, predominantly, skills a mix of technology and business, and mostly technology. And I guess the challenge 2010 plus is that going to flip? So if it splits into different roles, are we going to see pure business skills? Are we going to see pure technology skills in there as two of the leaders? And that may be featured in a split in the role. Then moving on to the next question. Where will the future CIOs spend their time? This is an extract from CIO magazine, and the current top 5 issues and areas where CIOs spend their time at the moment are described down the left. I think my view on this is I think what we're seeing is that moving up the ranking is going to become designing and optimizing business processes, for example, and strategic planning, business planning. And probably moving further down the ranking is going to be the strategic systems divisions that sit with those. And also the probably more important, interacting with external business partners will come into the flow. And then finally, to cap off, the question here is, what's the responsibility of the CIO in the future? Now, our current IBM research shows that 60% of CIOs have no other responsibility, but that does leave a huge number who do have other responsibilities, be it operations, R&D, strategy, and you can see some of the other ones go there. So what we are seeing is definitely the role evolving into a broader-based role. But I think I'd complete by concurring with Olaf that there are no right answers. There is definitely a multiplicity of roles going forward, and it comes down, I think, to the individual and the enterprise as to whether those are a multi-skilled person or several roles in the company. So I'll end there. Thank you.
Terrific, Robin. This was very informative. And, I believe that you have covered quite a bit of ground here. And as a result, we've got a couple of questions. So I'm going to just push one of those questions. You can respond to that, Robin, and or Gary or Olaf. So here goes. What we're trying to figure out is, if the company has already got a CIO, is there a reason to recruit a CTO? And how do you distinguish between these two roles?
Yeah, I'll take that one if it's okay, and then hand over to the other guys if anyone else wants to follow up. My view on this one is I think it depends on scope and scale. So for example, I know of big consumer products companies where they do have a CTO, and the reason there is because of scale. I mean, the CIO's role in a multinational consumer product company is absolutely huge, and therefore there is a discrete CTO. I think it's also my experience of some companies like UK retail companies. They tend to call their chief architect, so the enterprise architect, if you like, is the CTO. So for me, there's an element of scale, but I think it's also scope. And again, my view would be it comes down to the individual. If the CIO probably has the breadth there, they may take it on board if they've got the bandwidth. If not, they may want to delegate that to. So that'd be my view. So I hand over to my colleagues if they have a view as well.
Yeah, it's Olaf here. My observation on that, I think, I agree on the scale thing, where we often see a separate CTO position compared to the CIO is for companies who have, very extensive R&D activities in pharmaceuticals, petroleum, oil and gas companies, exploration businesses, where technology is such an important part of R&D that will often require, a dedicated CTO with some kind of a dotted line into the CIO.
Gotcha. I think that this is terrific. Folks, we're running slightly behind, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the presentation and the control over to you, Gary, and after your presentation, perhaps we'll have some time to have a panel discussion where we'll be able to ask, take a look at this question in depth and ask more questions. So, Gary, here goes.
Hi, everyone. I'm the lucky guy who gets to speak last and therefore has to worry about repeating all of the great things that the two previous presenters have said. And I think broadly speaking, my ideas are very much in line both with Olaf's and Robin's. I'd like to start, though, by sort of remembering what ultimately CIOs are there to do. And whilst we like to draw these in more exciting ways and like to put more bullet points around them, fundamentally, CIOs are interested in innovation, cost, and risk. And at different times, different elements of that might rise to the forefront. So innovation is fundamentally about moving business forward. It's about delivering some sort of business outcome, which, from a business context, converts into shareholder value. So when I talk about innovation, it's helping the business to innovate. All the nice technical innovation that we do internally, good, but it's not innovation from the context of the business. This is always going to be present as an issue. A lot of very, very wishfully thinking suppliers like to think that in some way the reins have been taken off budgets in the last year or so. I'm simply not seeing that. I think cost is going to be an ever-present variable that CIOs have to worry about. And then of course, there's that component of risk. And I think what makes the job of a CIO so difficult is that if you increase one of those values, you have an impact on the other two. You can't simply innovate like crazy without there being some impact on cost and risk. So in talking to CIOs and helping CIOs strategy, we're constantly coming back to this thought of, how does lowering risk have an impact on your cost base or your ability to innovate? And we're seeing a whole range of different approaches. And certainly in terms of the future of the CIO role, I agree very strongly with the picture that's been painted so far by the other presenters. I characterize it in a much more simple way. The traditional role of a CIO is simply becoming too broad and too complex. If you really believe that one person is going to be able to ensure technical excellence and IT efficiency at one end of the spectrum and deliver business process change and business innovation at the other end of the spectrum. So the theory that I propound is that the old style dinosaur CIO is facing an extinction event, and the role is going to evolve in two broadly different directions. At one end, you have what I describe as the lizard, which I believe is, roughly speaking, a distant relative of dinosaurs. This is the classic head of IT operations or chief technology officer. A highly valued, very important role, but much, much more focused on in truth, many CIOs, indeed, when I was a CIO in an SMB organization before coming to Ovum, I certainly belonged in this category myself. Many of us are actually very happy operating at this level. Enjoy getting our hands dirty and making technology work. There's nothing wrong with that, and of course it's an essential service that organizations require to function. But it's a different type of role requiring different talents and different levels of expertise to be the role that belongs, if you like, at the opposite end of the spectrum. The third is much more interested in business processes. And it was interesting when the question was asked, should a CIO recruit a CTO? One of the things that occurred to me was that rather depends on what kind of CIO is already in the job, because it could be what the business needs to do. So if the CIO is very business oriented, maybe they do need someone much more technical, with a much more technical focus. But if they're technically focused, maybe what they need is someone with a much more business-oriented focus. So not necessarily existing CIOs recruiting people under them. There's a very real chance and a very real likelihood that some existing CIOs will find people recruited over them, people who are much more focused on the business. Now, I've seen this in Europe several times in the last couple of years, where people from very, very non-traditional backgrounds in terms of IT put into leadership positions within IT organizations almost because they have a non-IT background. People from HR, people from lines of business, even people from the sales organization in one case. It's not automatic that as a CIO we will grow into. It's not automatic that we're going to find a place on the board with all the kudos and the pay, earn that right to move up the food chain. And I think for some CIOs, that move is going to be just too difficult. It's not in their nature. Others, by taking a much more active role in the business, by ensuring that you recruit a team who can deal with the technology to give you the chance to spend more time in the business. When I ask CIOs if they'd like to spend more time operating at a strategic level, they almost universally say yes. And wouldn't it be great if they could actually engage with the business? Well, if you're the CIO, that's almost in your power. If you organize your function appropriately, maybe get ahead of IT operations. That should free you then to engage much more closely with the business. Because lizard-like CTOs or heads of technology or heads of IT operations aren't going to make it to the CEO job. And in fact, I think they're quite unlikely to make it onto the board. But if you can show that, in fact, you're ready and able to engage in changing the business, in delivering genuine business innovation, that's a ticket to the board and potentially a ticket to the top job. Those are the slides that I had. I want to talk, I suppose, a little bit in terms of providing just a couple of nuggets of advice before I hand back. I think that as CIOs, you need to do your own personal audit and decide actually what it is you really want to do. Do you really want to engage at a business level, or are you actually happier running complex operations? What turns you on individually? And then look for strengths and weaknesses, because I meet many people who love the idea of living in technology, but maybe have the qualities needed to do that. And I also meet a few people who really do aspire to being on the board, but simply aren't yet prepared. And I certainly agree with the earlier speakers that this isn't something that you're born to do. This is a set of skills that you can acquire. But I think you need to start effort in planning your own career to ensure that you can move up the value chain and be aspire aspire to that role of business partner, which sat at the top of a broad hierarchy, which essentially fills in the gaps between my bird at the top and my lizard at the bottom. So thanks very much for listening to me. I hope I've given you something to think about it, and I'll hand you back to our moderator.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gary. This was very informative, and really enjoyed listening to you. I do have a question for you, though. I think as a follow-up to the question that we had about the CTO role and adding a CTO role, who should the CTO role report to? So now if you're going to separate the responsibilities of these two, in your estimation, should the CTO role respond to the CIO, report to the CIO, or should they be reporting directly to the CEO?
Well, my personal view is that the CTO should be reporting to a very business savvy CIO. The CEO of a huge European consumer electronics company said to me the other day, "I don't want geeks on my board. I don't want to talk about technology in board meetings. I want to talk about new markets. I want to talk about shareholder value. I want to talk about exploiting channels. It's important to me that I have someone who is looking after that, and it's important to me that some of the changes that new technology enables come to the board, but I don't want a technologist on the board."
Got you. I think that's interesting. Olaf, what is your perspective, if I may?
Sure. It's not a single answer. I think if you have a company which has a very heavy R&D portfolio, or let's say an exploration business, I think it makes sense that the CTO reports into the leader of that function, because it's a role which will in IT enable things you do within R&D or exploration. And at the same time, I think that there's a need to have a dotted line into the CIO, because there are some synergies there in terms of architectures, in terms of the way you procure and you source services and technology, etc. So obviously it requires some strong coordination. If you have a different scenario where the CIO is much more much closer connected to the business and have more of a business background, he may need a CTO as more of a kind of an architectural person in his team to help out with technology issues. So it really depends on what the scenario is.
Gotcha. Robin, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I would just probably concur with the other guys in the sense that the two are very related. But I think, again, for me, it comes down to the scale argument. But I guess ultimately, yes, if I were the CIO and I was in an organisation large enough where we felt it was important to have a CTO too as well, I would have thought that I'd be the closest to somebody who could manage that person, as opposed to having them report through a different line. So my personal view is the CIO absolutely ought to be at the board, absolutely ought to be talking business change, not technology, but have that CTO report to them in instances where the technology is relevant and needs to be explained.
Gotcha. I think this is fair. In terms of, I've got one more question for you, Gary. How does the CIO, the bird, gain ownership of the business processes from the business?
Well, I'm fundamentally, the role isn't one about ownership. It's about being an agent to support the necessary take place within the business. So it's not about necessarily participating in a land grab. Although I think there are lots of operational processes that could very well be, if you like, allocated. I for example, that in some cases the chief operating officer role often has IT reporting into it, because the COO is kind of acting in many respects like this idea of CIO that we're talking about. So I don't necessarily think that CIO should own vast tracts of this. It should be there to support the constant improvement of these processes.
Got you. Folks, at this point, I'm going to push the results of the poll, and hopefully you ought to be able to see them. And if the panel can see them, would somebody, perhaps Robin, do you have any comments on the fact that the first question we asked was, what does the CEO expect of the CIO? And 88% believe that the top three, all of the above, get IT to create a cost advantage, transform business processes, and of course transform business models. Any surprises there?
No, there's not actually, and in fact, I think this goes back to my point about you only get a seat on the table above if you manage, the one thing. I think particularly the drive on cost advantage is really heavily being seen again at the moment in terms of sorting that out. And unfortunately, if you can't get the cost down, you can't liberate funds to help transform business processes and models. So I think it's fair that there is an element of all three. I suspect the split is very different depending on the industry you're in there.
Gotcha. What about you, Olaf? What do you think?
I think this reflects what I think has been a common theme in this discussion is that the CIO role, if anything, is a role, and particularly compared to a number of other functional roles, is just getting broader and broader in terms of scope and responsibility. So it's really, all of the above. I think you see CIOs as a function is getting very broad in terms of his responsibilities.
Got it. Gary, do you find any surprises here? Does this viewpoint concur with yours?
Oh no, it concurs absolutely. And certainly that's.
Gary, we lost you there. Are you still with us?
Oh, sorry. Yes. No. I agree completely. I would have chosen all of the above, given those choices as well. And those three items map moderately well onto this notion of innovation, cost, risk is there, the notion of compliance. But yes, that's the dilemma that CIOs face, definitely.
Got you. I've just pushed the results for the second poll question, and I'm a bit surprised to see a couple of responses. One, I don't see anybody saying that the CIO should be reporting into the board of directors, and two, I see some responses, 5% of the audience feels that the chief financial officer should be the boss of the CIO. Any comments there, Olaf?
No, it's interesting, and I'm among the one who voted for the CEO because I think that makes most sense for most CIOs. The reality, though, is that most CIOs today, and I don't have the exact percentage reporting to the CFO, but I think we will see a change here.
Okay. What about you, Robin? What do you think?
Yeah, I concur. I voted for the CEO one as well, because I think reporting into the board of directors, I guess, can give, depending again on the strength of the CIO, a little bit of a broad, a broad spread of responsibility for people from whom you're taking direction. So, and I absolutely agree. I think it's the right thing to preferably have a place on the board and certainly to take strategic direction from the CEO. But I would view the board as directors as peers rather than people you work for. Gotcha.
At this point, I wanted to ask a couple of questions based upon the presentation I've seen so far. There are three separate agendas, as I can tell. One of them is obviously the board of directors, what they want the company to do and what they want the CEO to do. The second one is what the CEO takes that to be and what is it that they want to do. And then the third one is the CIO's agenda. Do you all feel that these three agendas are kind of one of the same as it comes to technology in most organizations, or do you feel that sometimes there's collision, sometimes there's divergence? What do you think, Gary?
I think are you guys?
There's a bit of stagnancy.
My view is that
There's a bit of static in the line. Better now? Hello, Gary, you still there? Hello? Are you online by any chance, Robin?
Hi there. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, much better.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of a trouble on the line, I think. Yeah, my view is that they should be aligned, but in my personal experience of both talking to CIOs and being one for a year, I don't think they are often aligned. For example, the real unrelenting pressure on reduction of IT costs is pretty merciless in some industries. Yet also is the need to get value from IT and innovation and all the rest of it. So I think the agendas can be a bit cross purposes, and for me the strength of the CIO is to be able to argue the case with the CFO and the CEO for cost reduction where there's value to be gained, but holding out where you think it'll actually destroy value and impact on service.
Gotcha. Gary, can you put your phone on mute by any chance? Okay. Olaf, what about you? What do you think on the three agendas?
I hope you can hear me because the line is terrible. It sounds like someone needs to recruit a new CTO. I think it's important to look into these questions from a time perspective. A company needs evolves over time, and you have companies who are in deep financial crisis today who clearly need CIOs who can help driving cost out from the IT function, but also from other functions. And when the turnaround is made, that company is most likely looking for some kind of a innovative and profitable growth, which may require a different CIO. And sometimes you have CIOs who can kind of align themselves with that evolution of the business, but in some cases they cannot, and that's when they need to be replaced, and you bring in a new CIO who is more aligned to the new agenda. So I think it's very important to keep the alignment, but you have to realize sometimes because of changing needs, you may also have to readdress the CIO you have in place.
Now, what about the CIO and COO role? In some organizations, they're both one and the same. In certain other organizations, the CIOs are reporting into the COOs. Should there be two separate roles, given the fact that essentially what the CIO is doing is automating business processes? Shouldn't these be one and the same role, and perhaps get rid of the CIO role and keep the COO role? What do you think, Robin?
Yeah, it's good challenge. I think that again would require a bit of a kind of shift in emphasis from innovation to operations. My view is that where the CIO role is purely about operations, which I guess Gary likened to a CTO role, it could be absorbed into COO land, and then the CIO is free to be more of an innovator and a business change person. But I think horses for courses. I think there isn't going to be necessarily a one-size-fits-all. That will come down to the individuals concerned, the style of the company, but it may be something we see more of.
Olaf, I have a question. I think somebody in this presentation mentioned, we've heard very infamously, I would say, that IT doesn't matter. And if IT doesn't matter, then perhaps the CIO role doesn't matter. What do you think? Does IT matter? Does the CIO role matter?
Oh yeah, I think big way. I think more and more we see how the CIO can, add value to a company, and independent on the kind of CIO you're looking for. If you're looking for a CIO who is more of a COO, who is, someone who can excel in terms of managing operations, I mean, that's added value in itself, right? And you see some CIOs of that nature who gets more and more responsibility I think, though, that most CIOs who add value are probably doing that more in the innovation, the business partnering space. That's where I think they can add value the most. I mean, I don't think any company today could survive without a CIO.
No, absolutely, and I think fundamentally, this IT doesn't matter was quite surprising to me. Now, if we were to look at the future, and one of the questions coming up is, how does one prepare for this emerging role of the CIO? So people who are in this position right now, how is it that they prepare? And people who want to get there, what is it that they need to do? Robin, you want to take that?
Yeah, my advice to people would be get close to the business. Making sure your house is in order is important, and spending time with your own IT team is important. But for me, getting close to the business and understanding the real issues that drive the business is what differentiates the future CIO from the technology-focused CTO, if you like, of the future. So any way that people can do that, and that may be just through learning, through being with people, it may be through coaching of other senior executives in the business, which I know some people find fairly powerful. It may be, if you're relatively early in your career, taking an MBA to broaden out, or do what I did, do a spell in consulting, and then you may get a much broader exposure to many different kind of business change projects, which could then set you up nicely to be a CIO in the future.
Well, I think you have a perspective that is rather unique here. You deal with CEOs who are hiring these people and providing insight into what kind of individual they're looking for. What do you think?
Yeah, let me give two pieces of advice. I mean, I think we can conclude from this session that the CIO role is not getting narrower, it's getting broader. So, for people who are starting their career in this function, ensure yourself that you can that you get rotation of get new responsibilities from time to time. And if you cannot get that in your with your current company, you have to look around and go somewhere else and take on other CIO responsibilities or IT responsibilities to kind of capture the business skills, the technology skills, operation skills, etc., right? That's very important, getting some international exposure and all of that. The other thing, when we're looking, in particular for the big CIO searches, I mean the big group CIO, the Fortune 100 CIO searches, what we're looking for there is soft skills. I mean, we can find, tons of CIOs with the technology skills, but when we're starting looking into the soft skills, networking skills, presentation skills, leadership skills, people skills, that's where the pool of talent gets thinner and thinner. So people who have that ambition to move up the track, end up as a group CIO, eventually CEO, sitting on a non-executive board. I mean, all those soft skill sets, that's something you should keep in mind all the time and keep working on, because I think, I know it can be learned.
Gotcha. Gary, I believe you're back. You wanted to comment on the IT doesn't matter question. I mean, I'm interested in hearing your views.
Yes, absolutely. And apologies to everyone. An amazing electrical storm followed by 4 very big cats rushing into the house.
My goodness.
Caused all sorts of disturbance. The IT doesn't matter question and the debate that surrounded it a couple of years ago was kind of fascinating because so much of the discussion was really, really meaningful. But also there were some very important sort of underlying points. If you look across the portfolio of technologies and technical processes that you support as a CIO, there's a very large proportion that doesn't matter to the business. It may be essential, just as having an electricity supply is essential, or having phones or email connectivity is essential. But a lot of what we do isn't stuff that we would advertise to our customers. We wouldn't say to our customers, yes, come to us because we use Salesforce.com as opposed to XYZ CRM. And a lot of it is stuff that we need to focus on delivering very much like a utility. And the smart CIOs are the ones who recognize those components that can and should be delivered like a utility in that way, with a real focus on stabilization, simplification, cost reduction, i.e. delivering efficient IT in the background, who also then free up time to focus on the significant component of IT that really does matter to your customers. And so, it's sort of following on from Robin's comments. I think there are kind of two steps you have to take. One is you have to get IT efficient. You have to make sure that you're running things in the appropriate way. But efficiency doesn't necessarily equate to effectiveness. And the next step you have to take is to take advantage of the freedom of movement you've given yourself by stabilizing and simplifying some of that boring infrastructure, so that you can actually deliver stuff that really is going to mean something to your business's customers, the people who run your business, and obviously the shareholders who own the business.
Gotcha. That's right on the money. Folks, we are running out of time, and I wanted to once again thank you all for joining us for this webinar. We've definitely enjoyed having you for this webinar, and hope you can come join us again for other webinars in the series. And I'm also hopeful that you've gained something from this discussion. If you would like to send in your questions to any one of our panel of experts, I'd be happy to pass them on to them. You can send them to expert@cioindex.com. Please visit www.cioindex.com for all of our upcoming webinars. And we are planning some more webinars in this series, so I hope to see you there again. Again, thanking this excellent panel for a very exciting and interesting discussion. I'd like to sign off at this point. Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.